Un po' duro. Grazie.
C'è la traduzione English translation.
Oh. Where's this go? Qui? Orecchio?
Sì.
That's our phone, so
Io pardon.
dall'altro lato. Così, no?
Oh, vai. Ah,
Ok?
sì, sì, grazie.
Salve e benvenuto. Ognuno di noi ha un desiderio, o tanti desideri. Uno dei miei più grandi desideri è chiudere gli occhi e immaginare che sono sul set di Misfits. E oggi abbiamo l'incredibile fortuna di poter ascoltare Angela Allen, che è un personaggio mitico della storia del cinema e che è qui con noi e che questa sera presenterà il film in Piazza Maggiore, e io veramente sono molto emozionato e la ringrazio di cuore per la fedeltà che ha avuto in questi anni a venire sempre al cinema Ritrovato, quindi veramente grazie, 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 grazie.
Thank you.
Allora, ho preparato un po' di foto, sono le straordinarie foto della Magnum, che aveva un contratto di esclusiva per questo film. Ecco, per chi non ci credesse che Angela Allen era la segretaria di edizione del film, direi che...
Qui? Oh. I can hear you.
Ecco, per chi non ci credesse che Angela Allen era la segretaria di edizione del film, ho preparato questa foto e la successiva, ecco, è quella signorina col cappellino che parla con John Huston, che guarda molto dubbioso Harry Miller, che sta preparando, probabilmente sta cambiando ancora una volta la sceneggiatura del film. Ecco, quella deliziosa signorina è Angela Allen. Il film ecco, vi ricordo soltanto che il film è uno dei film più incredibili, a mio avviso, di tutta la storia del cinema, anche per il destino dei suoi interpreti. Clark Gable è morto di attacco cardiaco subito dopo la fine delle riprese. Le riprese finiscono il 4 novembre del 1960, Gable ha l'attacco cardiaco il giorno dopo la fine delle riprese e muore il 16 di novembre. Per Marilyn Monroe di fatto questo sarà l'ultimo film, e morirà il 5 agosto del 1962, e sarà uno degli ultimi film di Montgomery Clift. È un film, alla sua uscita la critica non ci capì nulla di questa superproduzione, che era però in bianco e nero, con protagonista un'attrice che era la più famosa, attrice brillante, che qui era in un ruolo drammatico, un film pieno di cowboys, però non è western, e un film girato nella patria dei casinò, dove però i casinò non si vedono, e un film che è anche, a mio avviso, la sua grandezza sta anche nell'essere paradossalmente, benché sia uno straordinario film di finzione, con una straordinaria sceneggiatura, con interpreti assoluti, secondo me è anche un documentario su ognuno di loro, tanto riesce a essere vero. Allora, io, Angela, ti vorrei iniziare intanto a chiedere, le riprese dovevano durare 50 giorni, invece sono durate 90 giorni.
It lasted 90 days because, well, we did have a stop for a week when Miss Munro was sent to the doctors. But because she was always late, we were never on schedule. We never managed to, or rarely managed to finish anything that we planned to complete in a day. It was always waiting.
Ma forse la prima domanda che ti devo fare è: qual è il tuo, quando pensi a Misfits, hai un ricordo positivo, negativo, terribile, formidabile? Qual è la prima sensazione che è nel tuo ricordo?
Well, for me, the memory of the Misfits was arriving obviously in Nevada, Reno, Nevada, and meeting Arthur Miller. Houston, of course, I knew, reading the script. And then the actors arrived, and I was made to take the first rehearsal, or reading, shall we say, not a rehearsal, a reading of the whole script without Miller or Houston present. And at that point, I thought Marilyn was charming, and John asked me how it went, and I said, oh, she's sweet, very sweet, charming girl, and they all read. Well, of course, at this point, they all had a script in front of them, including her, and she could read. So that went quite well. But from really the moment we started shooting, because she had this, everybody loathed this woman, Paula Strasberg, who was the wife of Lee Strasberg from the Actors Studio, who completely dominated Marilyn. She couldn't do anything without her. She would, after a take, if Houston said, print it, she would not look at Houston, she would look at Paula. If Paula gave a sign, then she'd say, oh, can I do it again? And John would always say, yes, you can. But this woman, dominated everything that Marilyn did.
Facciamo un passo indietro, e cioè ci puoi raccontare come John Huston dirigeva normalmente gli attori e in particolare in questo film? Nel senso, John Huston era un regista che era abituato a preparare molto le scene, a dirigere molto gli attori, o era un regista che lasciava liberi gli attori?
Huston was a director who did not like to go into what is my thought process. That was not John's style. He always said, if you cast correctly, you will get the performances, and all you need to do then is say a bit more, a bit less. So that is how he worked. He was never telling them what to do, how to say a line, what the thought process was. Because he never did that on any film. He didn't like it if an actor asked him, what is my motivation for this scene? He'd probably say, read the script, that's your motivation. But no, he was not that kind of director.
E Marilyn aveva un buon rapporto con John Huston dai tempi di Asphalt Jungle, e poi durante il film che cos'è successo tra loro due?
Marilyn did the film because, she had just married, not just married, she'd been married about a year or so, or more, to Arthur Miller, and she liked John Huston because he had given her, in a way, her first break. And John knew when he started the film from Billy Wilder, who just, had done Some Like It Hot, who said to him, my God, it shouldn't happen to you. She's nearly killed me. So John knew, he did know that she was going to be difficult, probably read Times and Paula Strasberg. But I don't think he really realized quite how difficult. She was also, which is kind of strange, but Arthur Miller had written The Misfits when he was waiting for a divorce from his first wife in Reno. And here we were making the film, and the marriage was already breaking up. So it was time to get a second divorce. So I didn't know at the time that they were breaking up, but that made everything even more difficult. And also, Houston had Arthur Miller rewriting the script daily. It was not just, you know, a couple of lines here and a couple of lines there. We'd be rewriting, and Arthur would rewrite it. I would have to type it because the secretaries didn't seem to want to do it. And no sooner had I typed 30 pages than John would have Arthur rewriting it yet again. So it was quite difficult, but all the other actors managed.
Le modifiche della sceneggiatura rispetto alla sceneggiatura iniziale, che modifiche erano?
Oh, well, it would be dialogue, or John would have a new idea for the day, that he wanted the scene to work slightly differently. And that poor Arthur did say one day, I can't think of a new way, you know, to rewrite this scene. But John was always like that with writers. The only difference on The Misfits was because he had great respect for Arthur Miller, he did not pick up the pencil himself. On other films, although other people have been credited with the script, John used to rewrite them himself.
E la relazione invece tra John Huston e gli altri due protagonisti, con Claire Gable e Montgomery Clift, che relazione era?
John Huston he had a very good relationship with Clark Gable, who was a professional, who came to work, he knew his lines, and he was always charming and did whatever was asked of him. With Monty Clift, it went pretty well, because when he did his scene, which you will see in the telephone box, he did that actually in one take. He could be a little irritating for John at times, but John actually never realized that Monty Clift was homosexual. And that didn't please him when he eventually found out somewhat later.
E quindi arriviamo adesso a una delle questioni appunto centrali che tu hai iniziato a introdurci, che è la relazione tra Mary Monroe e la moglie di Lee Strasberg. E abbiamo queste fotografie che sono abbastanza impressionanti. Quella dietro allo script è lei.
Paula Strasberg, as I think I've said, completely dominated Marilyn's life. She was there around her and never allowing anybody else to do anything except, of course, the wardrobe people and the hairdresser. But she did not encourage Marilyn to talk to John much or to talk to anybody. She kept her in the caravan. I mean, between takes, they'd go into the caravan, and really nobody could approach them. She was completely dominant. I think, you know, well, we all know this right throughout the film. and she had been dominant on the film. She'd been on Some Like It Hot, Paula Strasberg. She'd been on The Prince and the Showgirl. Well, Laurence Olivier couldn't stand her either. Well, nobody could stand her, to be honest. She was a very dislikable woman.
E quindi sul set c'era questa situazione stranissima di Paula Strasberg che durante le riprese fa sì che il rapporto tra Marilyn e Arthur Miller si deteriora ulteriormente, ma la mia domanda è come Huston non riesce a intervenire, nonostante l'enorme prestigio e la sua enorme esperienza, non riesce a limitare questa presenza così anche devastante di Paula Strasberg.
Well, nobody could. If Billy Wilder couldn't do it, John couldn't do it either. She was there. Marilyn was on pills, go-to-sleep pills, waking up pills, I don't know what else. And she just dominated. And Huston knew this, as I said, when he started the film. And after all, we were then shooting, so there really wasn't much he could do about it. He could moan and complain to me and to anybody else, but you really couldn't, he could not say, get off the set, because if he'd said, I don't want you on the set, leave, then Marilyn would have walked out and, you know, we couldn't have continued. So there really was no choice in the matter. We were stuck with Paula.
Arthur Miller ha detto che il metodo di Strasberg è il contrario di quello che dovrebbe essere il metodo di un insegnante verso gli attori, che dovrebbe portare un attore a essere totalmente libero. E lui dice che il metodo di Strasberg era esattamente il contrario, era quello di rendere gli attori totalmente dipendenti da lui. Ti ritrovi in questa dichiarazione di Miller?
Oh, absolutely. Arthur Miller's evaluation, shall we say, of Paula was absolutely right. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't interrupt, although he was the writer and, in this case, the husband. The marriage was disintegrating and Paula had the upper hand. And no matter what Arthur might have said to Marilyn or tried to, she just ignored him and only listened to Paula.
È possibile invece valutare i meriti di Paula, cioè l'interpretazione di Marilyn è straordinaria e in questo film dimostra in maniera inequivocabile le sue grandissime doti di attrice anche drammatica. Ma queste doti gli appartenevano o questa ossessività di Paula ha fatto sì che queste doti fiorissero completamente nel film?
I think Marilyn was, shall we say, I can never say she was a great actress. I think she was instinctive. She'd never had formal training. Oh, yes, she'd been to the actor's studio. But the sort of thing, and I caught it one day, I had very good eyesight, and I managed to see what Paula had written into the script and whatever. I couldn't see the line, but I could see her note which said, "You are a branch on a tree." And Huston said to me, "Well, what have you seen? What have you seen?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, what does that mean?" I said, "How the hell do I know what it means any more than you do?" But those are the sort of things, presumably, that she used to tell her. Not that I think it sunk in particularly in that way. I think Marilyn was an instinctive actress, and I'm not sure that she always knew, I mean, when it was a good take, how she did it or why she did it that particular way. It just came out that way. I don't think that she'd really thought it through, as, you know, a lot of other actors have thought how they're going to read a line and how they're going to portray the part. I just think it was instinct. I may be wrong, but that was my impression.
Nella relazione con gli altri attori, penso ad esempio a una relazione con Clark Gable, che invece era un attore di tradizione, ecco, come Gable poteva accettare la recitazione di Marilyn e la presenza di Paula.
Well, again, Clark Gable played his scenes with her and was very generous with his time, both waiting for her to appear, but because after all he was a much older man and he was very gentle, she in a way tried her wiles on him, but he wasn't in the least bit interested. But he was totally professional with her, as he was with everybody. The other actors, like Thelma Ritter, she was all right with Thelma because Thelma was a woman and much older, and she wasn't a rival in any way. Marilyn did get on with Monty Clift because, again, Monty was a bit of a lost soul himself. So I think it was a question of two, you know, very lost people getting together.
Ecco, questa è una delle tantissime immagini che ritraggono Huston e Miller che parlano assieme, e la mia domanda è come è nato il film? Come è nato questo film così produttivamente stranissimo, una grande produzione mai in bianco e nero, un film totalmente indipendente, e quindi
It came about because Arthur was a friend of Frank Taylor, who was the producer, but actually Frank was in the publishing world. And they were great friends and lived in nearby towns. And I think it was Frank who said to Arthur, well, you know, maybe we should try and get Huston. You know, she liked him. And that's how I think it happened, that they sent the script to Huston in Ireland, and he found it interesting, and then Arthur went over there, and well, they both went over there to meet with John, and that's how it came about. And Frank had to, obviously, in his producer capacity, find the money for the film. But when you had Marilyn Monroe as your star name and Clark Gable, I think it probably wasn't quite as hard as it could be for other people.
Però era anche un progetto di Miller di offrire a Marilyn una parte drammatica completamente costruita su di lei, con un regista amico.
Yes, Arthur wrote the Misfits, as I said, when he was waiting for a divorce to marry her. And I suppose you could describe it as a love letter to Marilyn. He wrote it for her, yes. She was definitely the only protagonist in that role. No other actresses were considered. By the time we came to make it, I'm not sure that, you know, the feelings were quite the same.
E questa è un'immagine di Frank Taylor, il produttore e amico di Arthur Miller, che lo vediamo proprio dietro ad Arthur Miller sul set, e queste fotografie bellissime, ecco, sono tra le foto secondo me di set più belle di tutta la storia del cinema. Ci restituiscono anche l'impressione di una grande produzione hollywoodiana, ma anche di un film totalmente indipendente e nelle mani di artisti assoluti come Huston e come Arthur Miller, e questo sicuramente anche grazie alla disponibilità di Frank Taylor. Frank Taylor poi ha prodotto altri film.
No, he didn't, not as far as I know. I mean, I still keep in touch with one of his sons who was there and was about 9 at the time. No, he didn't after that. But John Huston was a great friend of all of the Magnum photographers because he had known the man who started the whole organization. He'd been a great friend. And so we always had Magnum photographers. We started, our first 2 photographers were Henri Cartier-Bresson and Inga Morath, who subsequently married Arthur. But at that point, you know, she wasn't remotely in line or anything else. They were there for 2 weeks, and then they would go, and then somebody else would come, Burt Glynn, Eve Arnold, all of them who I knew. And in fact, the best photo I think I've ever had was from one of the Magnum photographers, who actually is, I think, the only one still left alive. He's late 90s and lives in New York. So that's why the photos were so good on the film. I mean, they were a great team, well, a great group of photographers, each had their own style.
Sì, nello stesso tempo, certo, i fotografi erano sicuramente straordinari, avevano anche evidentemente una ottima relazione con tutti gli attori e con Huston e con Miller, perché le foto sono anche molto intime, ma la questione è anche che sembrano le foto dell'Olimpo, cioè sono le foto sugli attori più belli, più incredibili dell'epoca d'oro del cinema su un set pazzesco, e quindi secondo me sono le foto dell'Olimpo queste. Anche per questo sono così belle, ecco, perché oggettivamente le location, gli attori, la situazione, la combinazione è assolutamente perfetta.
Yes, but they also were the #1 photographic agency. I mean, they had the best photographers on their with that agency, and you know, they were all experienced. None of them were novices. And I agree, I think, you know, they all ultimately, I think, after Marilyn died, etc., issued books and albums of the shooting, each, you know, their version of it, because they said they weren't there for the whole film. Each one had a specific time period.
Ecco, ritornerei un momento sulla relazione tra Monty, Clift e Marilyn. Questa foto è secondo me molto 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 bella e dà bene l'idea di una relazione intima tra loro, e ho letto che uno dei maggiori problemi del film era stato convincere le assicurazioni a coprire Clift, che era noto potesse bere moltissimo e quindi mettere a repentaglio il set. Invece ci dicevi che è andato tutto bene con lui.
Yes, with Monty Clift, there were, I believe, before the film, he was known to drink. That was since his accident, etc., etc. And on that film, I actually didn't know, I got on with him very well, but I didn't know that he was drinking, he would say, grapefruit juice, but had a large amount of vodka in it, I believe, but it never showed. He never got drunk. John never saw him having a bad evening, because Houston was in the Mapes Hotel, as most of us were, but Monty and I think a few others were in a different place. So he never ever saw Monty out of filming hours. And it was on the basis of the Misfits, as we were shooting, that John cast him in Freud, which was his next picture afterwards. And that was certainly not a happy experience, but he didn't know anything about Monty apart from the fact he was a good actor and a friend of Elizabeth's. So that's how it happened.
Ecco, mentre invece per quello che riguarda lo svolgimento delle riprese, le riprese sono svolte tutte in Nevada, e poi dopo siete andati a Hollywood per girare le scene in studio, e questa è una scena in studio della caduta nel rodeo, e devo dire che lo studio non si sente mai nel film, ecco, si ha sempre l'impressione che invece il film sia stato girato tutto dal vero.
Yes, everything was all the road with the Mustangs, etc. There was second unit shooting the wide shots. The only bit in the studio we did was what was then known as back projection of them in the car and seeing things, but no sets were built. We were only in the studio for 3 or 4 days to do the back projection shots of them in the car. We didn't do anything else. Everything else was shot for real in Nevada.
E poi fino adesso non abbiamo parlato di un altro degli straordinari interpreti del film, di Elia Wallach, e questa foto è la foto del ballo tra Marilyn ed Elia, che in fondo è l'unico tra i protagonisti ad aver avuto una bella carriera ancora dopo, e poi per noi italiani è il brutto dello straordinario film di Sergio Leone. E ecco, se ci puoi raccontare un po' della personalità di questo attore straordinario.
Well, Eli Wallach, yes, was a New York actor, and actually he was the one who knew Marilyn because she had gone to the actor's studio in New York and he'd met her, and he could get on with her and handle her. So she had a decent relationship with Eli. He wasn't remotely interested in her, but you know, from a professional point of view, that was fine. And of course, after the film, Eli went on to appear in many films. He also went back to the stage and lived a very long life. I think he only passed away a couple of years ago. But their relationship was fine. I mean, that was an easy one for her because she had met him before.
Ma una curiosità, in media quanti Chuck venivano battuti per le riprese di Misfits?
Well, you never had an average. John was not somebody who would say, go again, without a reason. If they managed to get through their lines and not fall over the props, as we say in the business, no, and as long as emotionally he felt the scene was right, he would print it. With Marilyn, it was always a question of her getting through her dialogue, whereas all the others would get it right every time. You might wait, you know, for an awful lot of takes for her to get it right, and when she did get it right, you'd print it, and everybody else, you know, had hoped that they wouldn't blow up or make a mistake. So we didn't have as many takes, I think, as probably Some Like It Hot may have done, but more than John would normally like to do. He is somebody that if they got it right, he'd print it in take one or take two. But with her, it's always a question of, can she get through whatever the shot is and take?
E questa foto di Claire Gable è una foto, insomma, è veramente una foto straordinaria, che dà l'idea anche della fatica sul set. Ho letto che doveva avere un doppio vestito per proteggersi per le cadute, e quindi era anche molto caldo e era molto faticoso la scena finale del film in particolare.
I know everybody says that, and, you know, did it cause the heart attack? I would have said no. I mean, for anything where the horse, because those Mustangs are incredibly strong, and unless you're a stuntman, you can't handle them. And so he wasn't physically actually holding the Mustang. I mean, he was on a rope and attached to a car which was pulling him. And, you know, he never complained, and John would never have asked him to do, you know, really hard things, and there was always a double for anything involving the animals, which, as I said, were so tough. I mean, they kicked their poor stuntmen to pieces. So it wasn't that at all. That everybody thinks that was what caused Clark Gable to have the heart attack. That wasn't it. In actual fact, after the film, and he loved motor cars, and he was actually changing a tyre, and didn't feel so well, and went in and told his wife, and they didn't call the doctor that time, but that, I believe, was the first sort of mini heart attack, and then he had another one, I think, a few days later. But it wasn't the film. If anything that would have caused him to have it, I would have said it was having the patience to wait for her all the time, rather than anything physical.
Una delle cose che rendono questo film così unico è proprio la scelta della location finale, che credo fosse già nella novella di Miller, e che era ancora una riserva indiana praticamente intatta. Ho letto che adesso in realtà è molto cambiata, però forse ci puoi raccontare di questo luogo così particolare.
Yes, we were out on this very, very barren land, which is it's Indian country. I mean, we were near, not too far away from the lake, and it's from the lake. For the moment, the name has escaped me, of the lake. Well, that's Lake Tahoe, no, but there was another one around there. And they're now, where we shot on that very flat, looking like desert, is now being called officially Misfits Flats.
It is a Pyramid Lake.
Pyramid, see. Yeah. Thank you. I knew where it was, but now when I went there for a documentary, well, I suppose it must be 10 years ago, maybe, or more. We went out to the flats, and they said its official name is they're called Misfits Flats. It's the official title, of that piece of land. And it was incredibly hot out there. I mean, well, it really is the desert and white. And I remember driving from Reno out to the flats. And one day I said, "Oh, look, there's a lake." And they said, "You're raving mad. That's a mirage." And you used to get a mirage because it was so hot. So, yes, it was an extraordinary place and hadn't really changed when I saw it, as I said, about 10 years ago. Just its name has changed.
E poi arriviamo a una delle scene più sorprendenti del film, quando Marilyn gioca con la pallina e ecco, se ci racconti com'è andata questa scena, che vedendola oggi sembra ripresa molto facilmente e con grande gioia, ecco, come è andata realmente lo shooting?
Actually, that scene, yes, did go quite well. I mean, we were amazed she managed to do it. But yes, that was one of the early scenes in the film, because John always liked to shoot on every film if he could in continuity. There were certain scenes you couldn't do if you were obviously moving location. But as it was one of the early ones and she hadn't progressed to the disastrous state that she did, that was one of the easier scenes to shoot, and we got through those comparatively easily.
E forse ci puoi raccontare invece dei fuoriscena degli altri, in particolare John Huston, che ha molto approfittato del fatto che il film fosse a Reno per giocare tutte le sere. E Huston adorava il gioco d'azzardo, come un altro grande regista della sua epoca, come Vittorio De Sica, che si sa abbandonava i set dei suoi film per andare a giocare tutta la notte e tornare sfinito all'alba sul set, e anzi si diceva che i suoi produttori sapevano che le scene importanti non andavano messe subito al mattino, perché De Sica avrebbe avuto qualche difficoltà a dirigerle lucidamente.
Well, Huston was a gambler. He'd gamble on anything, 2 ants crossing a table. And that's quite true. But he did gamble most evenings. And of course, we were in our hotel, which no longer exists, called the Mapes. In those days, and I'm sure probably today, you cannot gamble on tick, as they say, like on the book, and pay when you can. When John used to gamble, and then in the morning you'd see him or anybody else who was up there. Marilyn only went up maybe once or twice. He cajoled her to going. Arthur was not a gambler, and he made Arthur go up a couple of times. Arthur did not enjoy it at all. And he was, didn't want to really waste his money, but so he only gambled very, very little. Marilyn, all she had to do was, like I did, was throw the dice and get 7, I think you had to get. But certainly Huston was up at the tables every night, yes. But most of the others weren't, certainly not Gable.
E poi il film è finalmente concluso, viene presentato, e tu hai un ricordo su se questo film rappresentava qualcosa di particolare per John Huston, o se era uno dei suoi tanti figli, nel senso, i registi si dividono in almeno 2 categorie, ecco, sono quelli che continuano ad avere un rapporto con i loro film tutta la vita, e poi sono quelli che invece, finito un film, non lo vogliono neanche più vedere e sono già nel nuovo film.
Well, I do think that John did a variety of subjects. He wasn't somebody who always, you know, shall we say, did the same story, whether it be a thriller or something that he wasn't good at, well, except for a couple of sequences. He was not a musical director. You wouldn't have asked him to do a Hello Dolly or something like that, because he didn't really understand it and wouldn't have wanted to. He did Annie, but that was really for the money. But I don't know what his favourite film would have been. Perhaps The Treasure of Sierra Madre, because his father was in it and Bogey was in it, and they won their Oscars on that. I don't think we ever discussed what was his favourite. Everything was a new adventure for him.
E invece per te Misfits è un film particolare nella tua carriera, o è uno dei tanti?
Well, it's a special film in my career for various reasons. It was fascinating for me to work with Arthur Miller. Marilyn took a dislike to me because I was a couple of years younger than her, and decided to accuse me of having an affair with Arthur Miller, and she behaved extremely badly one morning. And that was the day when she was so far gone, and she was saying to Eli Wallach, who was playing the scene, the beginning of the scene with her, oh, Angela's putting on an English accent. And he said, don't be stupid, she is. No, she's not. And then it was a scene where Clark Gable had to have her in his arms, and she was meant to be holding on to him, and she was hitting him. And I pointed this out to Houston, and Gable agreed with me. And that was the scene where 6 takes she wouldn't listen to Gable or Houston. And that's when we sent her down to Los Angeles to be, well, de-pilled or see the psychiatrist, whoever she went to. And that's when the film stopped for the 5 or 6 days. And from then on, you know, as far as I was concerned, I really didn't care. But, you know, I'd give her the lines or whatever I had to do with her, but I had sort of minimal contact. And by that time, anyway, she and Arthur had split up as far as they weren't living in the same hotel.
E allora concluderei sulla, purtroppo non l'ho messa nella selezione, ma insomma penso che tutti ce l'abbiamo negli occhi. La foto più famosa di Misfits è quella che riunisce Arthur Miller, gli attori principali, John Huston, ed è una foto che abbiamo tutti visto, ed è una foto in cui sembra che tutti si adorino e che tutto vada assolutamente bene. Invece sappiamo che quel set è stato un set estremamente complicato e anche doloroso, e quindi mi sembra che sia una foto che in qualche modo è una bella metafora del cinema e della capacità del cinema di trasformare la realtà.
Well, yes, you can say that, and after all, they are all actors, and they're asked to pose for a picture and smile and look happy, which of course they could all do. But I wouldn't have said that it was the happiest film anybody had been on. But it was fascinating, and of course, in retrospect, it's even more fascinating. In a way, I'm amazed that it has, you know, lasted as long. And I've met some people recently who just saw it on television in England and who'd never seen it before and were quite fascinated by it. So hopefully it's lasting, past the test of time.
Sì, ecco, allora ne approfitto per farti un'ultima domanda. Oggi uno degli elementi che secondo me rendono così moderno il film, oltre a essere un film che ha una materia così vitale, ecco, che la vitalità, la disperazione di Marilyn passa, non so come, ecco, ma arriva a noi a 60 anni di distanza, 59 anni di distanza, ma c'è un testo, c'è un gruppo di attori meravigliosi, una location fantastica, una storia forte, ma uno degli elementi di grande modernità è che è un film ecologista e mi chiedo se all'epoca questo elemento era stato veramente compreso, o è come nella maturazione dei vini, che i film poi maturano e degli elementi che magari non si erano subito notati col tempo escono.
Well, I don't think ecology at that point was, strongly felt about by most people. But regarding the Mustangs, because of course, they used to chase them out of the hills, and they were used. They were beautiful animals. They were used for dog meat. So there were many people, I think, who were against it and were trying to stop the capturing of the Mustangs, but I don't think people certainly weren't talking the way they are today.
Io sono incantato da Angela e possiamo solo trovare immediatamente un altro film in cui lei era sul set per farcelo raccontare e per ammirare la sua incredibile lucidità. Ecco, la lucidità di una professionista, il suo sangue freddo, e anche la sua memoria. Grazie Angela Allen.
Thank you for having me, Gian Luca.